Hello, everyone, and welcome to another in Rallyware's ongoing webinar series. Today, we're going to focus on digital transformation, specifically within direct selling. And I'm excited to have Julie Cabinaw with us. She is a recognized leader in digital transformation and marketing innovation, with 25 years of experience at direct selling companies like Scentsy, Tastefully Simple, Vorwerk, and even outside of direct selling at places, a little company called Amazon. Julie's led strategic initiatives in digital transformation, experience, marketing, technology. Julie, I am so happy that you're with us today, even if you are flickering a little in your video there.
I know, we were all fine for a while here, weren't we? Thanks so much, Rich. I'm excited to be here. Rich, as you mentioned, I've been blessed to be in this industry for quite a while. And, right now what I'm really doing is I'm working to help companies like everyone who's watching here bridge the gap between strategy and execution in really transforming the digital into a performance engine that can help really achieve results for all of our direct selling customers.
That sounds great. Sounds confusing to me. So let's try to get that simplified as we go through for folks. But before we begin, let me share a few logistics for today. We will be recording, or we are recording this session, and all of you will receive a link to that recording later this week. So at the end of today's presentation, we will be addressing any specific questions that you might have. So please think of them, enter them within that Q&A area, and we will try to address each and every one of those once we get to the end of our conversation. So Julie, to start this conversation, I'm going to reference a survey that Rallyware did back toward the end of 2024. We surveyed direct selling companies, and we found out that over half of those companies are only, if they've begun, only in the early stages of digital transformation. And many are saying that fragmented tools, manual processes, outdated onboarding as major barriers to growth. So you've worked within and outside of a lot of direct selling companies. So what are the top challenges you've seen that's slowing that growth for direct selling companies to adopt or enter digital transformation?
Yeah, I think for sure, you already hit on one, is our companies have a rich history of legacy technology that, oftentimes have been grown by happenstance. We've bolted on, a new tool here, a new tool there. And while that's been great for, point solutions, it really hasn't led to a complete digital ecosystem where everyone's able to leverage the data from the different systems in order to really drive performance. So I think the fragmentation is definitely a real issue. I think that, if we're kind of being honest with ourselves as we look at our operations, and I know, I've had challenges with this myself, is sometimes we can be in a bit of a legacy mindset when it comes to digital adoption. And when I say that, I mean, we've had a long storied history in this industry of how we are connecting people together and relying on face-to-face interaction. And I think that, our adoption, our embrace of how the digital can help fit into the face-to-face story is really important, because one doesn't replace the other. They live in harmony. And so that's the people side of digital, Rich, that I think, we really need to understand, is that it's not a necessary evil. It's actually a performance engine. And that performance engine can create momentum, that we can help overcome as, one of those challenges. So I think kind of, two things in that. Maybe a third that I'd mention is that we have the best laid plans for onboarding and kind of rep enablement. But if you're relying on, a lot of the onboarding systems that we have feel more like a puzzle to be solved than a clean path to be walked for a new rep who's coming into the company. And so we try to patchwork together, this PDF and this video and this piece, right? But it doesn't tell a cohesive story. And digital can be an amazing asset in helping pull those things together.
So let me focus on two of those points you made. The very first one about the technology, right? Legacy technology, solving the tech stack problem, that whole kind of thing. Do we have to be able to solve that whole entire thing holistically before I can get started with digital transformation?
No, and I think that if you wait, then you're going to lose, right? So we've got to be comfortable embracing where we are now, even if we have some of the challenges that we just talked about, but not shy away from developing a bold vision for the future. And so sitting with your team and doing, what a nerd might call design thinking exercises, right? Around your whole onboarding flow, around your customer experience, around your leadership and promotion experience to say, what do we want this to look like? And then really being purposeful about fitting in the pieces that are super successful for your field. And, but still you're going to have them using those pieces along the way. So you don't want to stop, right? Because your competitors aren't stopping, so you need to dive into that.
So let me ask you about that onboarding. That was that third point that I was going to come back to. So many times I talk to the companies as prospects, as our existing clients, that kind of thing. And as you said, they're trying to design this wonderful journey. I'm a brand new rep. I've got to take this step, this step, this step, this step. Do you think the people that we're trying to attract to direct selling today are somebody who's going to find that helpful or attractive? Or I'm leading the witness, right? Or is it those sort of in between moments of the day when I can fit in something that's going to help move my business forward?
Yeah, we have to understand it's the in between moments. Just 100%. I've seen really thick onboarding guides developed. I've been guilty of developing them, being part of that process. And those sit and collect dust. I'm just going to be, really real. We put all of this blood, sweat, and tears into them. And, really, people have the best intentions. They want to engage in the content. But we're in a society and a time when it's those little moments where we get to capture someone that we can take advantage of. So we need to fit in those moments like you talk about.
So as we're looking at these pieces of the puzzle that we are trying to make as simple as possible for somebody to begin with, how can I tell if those things that I'm doing, the levers that I'm pulling, dials I'm switching, are being effective? So what are some of those measurable business outcomes that you've seen?
Yeah.
Maybe the easiest things to track if I'm getting started in this, right?
Yeah. I think that there's some KPIs that everyone should have in mind to understand if their enablement is working. And I'm going to take a little bit of a sidetrack and talk about
I would expect nothing less.
That boy, if you are overspending time in content development that isn't matched by the enablement metrics, you've got something really off in your business. And so, I think that those metrics have to come as a goal when you're creating the content. So first and foremost, everything we're talking about here, you have to be thinking about it when you're creating the content. So I think about, the top line measures being really, rep activation rate and time to first sale. Those are certainly big ones that we all look at, but lead measures that kind of get to some of those, metrics that, you just talked about are things like, are they consuming content? Are they completing, maybe a training, or maybe are they meeting a first milestone of some variety that's a little bit easier for them to achieve, to build confidence. And so building that confidence while they are, learning about the company, onboarding with the company, can create momentum. And when we have momentum in the systems that we build, the things that destroy momentum are confusion and fragmentation. Again, things that destroy momentum are confusion and fragmentation. And so, you'll hear me say again and again, this isn't all about the technology. It's not, it's about the people, and it's about the customers and the representatives, right? So we want to make sure that the way is as clear as possible. So, other things that we can look at in that, kind of looking at the lead measures are the content engagement. What are the views looking like? What are the shares? What are the click-throughs looking like? How are people participating in campaigns that we might structure? Are they resonating with them, right? And then also digging beyond that top level of data to get into understanding of the why behind it. So, it's one thing to have the data, which we want to have, and we all have rich amounts of data that we can look at, but you need to get more curious to get one level below that and ask people who are engaging and being successful, what's working. Never get sick of asking what's working, right? And what's not working. The people that aren't engaging are as rich of a source for you as those that are engaging in some instances, because you want to understand why people aren't picking up what you're putting down, or they're not spending the time.
Boy, that's great. That's great advice, because so many times, right, we look for who's being successful, and we try to replicate that process. Mm-hmm. I just heard you say, and I love that, I'm going to start using it with some of our clients and prospects. It might be just as, valuable information on the people who aren't engaging, right? So let me go back to, we're talking about, putting these tools in the hands of these people. I'm going to go back to that survey we had with we found that 31% of those surveyed were really worried about overwhelming those reps. How do we do this with those? You've got a volunteer workforce. We're lucky if they give us a couple hours a week, right? For the majority of that volunteer workforce. How do we help them without overwhelming them?
Yeah. So, what I think we can all do is think about the simplest actions one can take to produce income. I think that that combined with just-in-time thinking, we want to have them be product experts. We want them to be sales motion experts, all of these things. They're part-time volunteer workforce. Think about what just the one next thing they need to do is to help get them on their path to success. And I'll tell you a little story. My background before getting into direct selling was analyzing really complex behavior change paths in healthcare. And how we would do that is we would do, data, analytics, right, of people that were in health plans. And we would stratify those individuals into groups, right? And understand what they were doing. And then our teams would go in and we might conduct 80 interviews, in a segment, spend 45 minutes with a person to really understand the thoughts, the beliefs, and the actions that were either driving or limiting them from taking the next step. And I've taken that same philosophy and moved it forward because, it's one side of the coin, getting people to change health behaviors. Rich, you're a runner, getting you to take the next step, the next run requires
just to get up in the morning,
right?
Get up in the morning to do that. Yeah, that's true.
It's that internal motivation, right? And so when we think about our reps and we think about our customers, it's just as important to understand those internal motivations, limiting beliefs, limiting skill sets, that can help us understand. So the data is one thing, but having a deeper understanding of it below that is going to help you basically create interventions for what is that one next thing, right? How can I break this down? And you might have things where, you have somebody who's in this kind of segment who is moving along at this sort of rate. You're going to present them with a different view after you get a little sense of how they're progressing than maybe somebody who exhibits some signs of feeling like they might be subject to overwhelm, or you might collect some of that information to say, how much time do you have in a week to devote to your business, right? So getting into that to make sure that you understand where they're coming from and how much time they have to devote, because it can feel very demoralizing. I was a direct seller for the first half of my career while I was working in high tech. And it can feel demoralizing if it feels like there's only one right path. Now, we know that our systems are built up of repeatable actions that work. But you also need to, potentially be willing and able to think about how to meet somebody where they are as we go.
So that's great advice, because everybody is at a different place in that journey, right? Everybody wants something different out of that reason they started with Young Living or Plexus or Pampered Chef or USANA or whomever, whatever product they love with that. So we're talking right now about making it simple. We're talking about those people at the beginning. And again, I'll go back to that, right? The people who are right now not successful or not engaging. Why is that? But let's go to the other end of that spectrum with me, if you will. Okay, so we know that in direct selling companies, yes, it's this volunteer workforce. We've got that small percentage of the top that their teams, their downlines, their generations produce the majority of the revenue for the company, right? So what are the strategies you've seen companies do, taking a look at that success, identifying it, replicating it, and even amplifying it, right? Those high impact behaviors across their entire distributor sales force.
Yeah. So I'm going to share a really interesting anecdote for a company that I used to work for. My first direct selling company, which, if you want to check me out, you could probably figure out who I'm talking about. But we really analyzed top performer patterns. And this was obviously before AI, which now there's so many more ways to analyze top performer patterns. And what we did was a few things. One was, if you think about the book Influencer, if you haven't read that, or if you haven't read it in a while, I highly recommend everyone look at that, in terms of, do people have a gap in knowledge, in ability, or motivation, right? And we looked at it through that lens to understand, where the strong parts were of those strong performers, and then cloning success, by really looking at ways to break down those behaviors through automated nudges, through, small coaching moments, through content that would deliver. And then we also did something interesting as an experiment from a motivation standpoint. And this was quite a while ago, but with a small group of our top performers, we then showed de-identified data, right? We showed our performers that were in those top levels how they compared to their peers. And nothing motivates a certain segmentation of people than knowing where they are in reference to their peers. And this was before some of the amazing things you have in Rally where, existed. And now, so much has been enabled with that, but showing them how they fit into their cohort really was powerful for many of those people. For some, it did motivate them. That's okay. That's why we have a multimodal approach, right, to providing that information. So, kind of leveraging that social proof, right, of leaderboards, stories, peer recognition, really taking, our top performers and understanding what their keys to success are, seeing if we can understand their scripts and their approaches and understand with small pilots how we might be able to replicate that. You don't have to create the whole, universe like we talked about in one go, right? How can we create some pilots and understand if the behavior is transferable or what tweaks we might need to make with our target audience to better internalize the message? Now,
so let me, I'm going to take us down a rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking about this upper strata. And when you said, put leaderboards out there, see how they could do against their peers, that group, they are competitive. They are just going to go for it. But that other group we were talking about earlier, and I know there's not only two groups, but I'm going to both extremes, right? That's demoralizing to me, right? It's like, oh, I can never do this. So how do we help them overcome that? Or I like with the small pilots, let's let those competitors up at the top beat each other up, right? Whereas what do we do with that other group to help them, nurture them, help them be successful in my company?
Yeah. And I think it boils down to, let's think about, these kinds of things, right? That we all might have, right? Is how do I compare my success against myself? Because that's, having internal motivation and kind of that intrinsic viewpoint on things is another really important part, right? So how do I break it down to really provide step-by-step pathways that can show me what I'm going to do next, right? Break it down, make it simple, make it feel achievable, and then celebrate success, man. Like if there's an opportunity to shower confetti for an action taken that's an income producing activity, do it. Like celebrate where people are to encourage that momentum.
Great, thank you. So we're talking about digital transformation, helping direct selling companies shift from just training and onboarding journeys to really empowering that field as entrepreneurs, right? And recently, it's probably been out there for years recently about this personal branding idea, right? I heard Wayne Moorhead at DSU. He's up there. He harkened back to the old days. I can remember being inside a direct selling company and they could only use this logo. They could only use these colors. If they used anything else, we'd slap their hands, right? Whereas now it seems like the distributors are the brand, right? So what role does personal branding play in that rep's performance?
I think this is probably, in addition to just understanding the basics of sales motion, right? Helping people understand that they are a brand is the next single most thing you can do to elevate your rep's success. And that can sound intimidating. Well, I'm a brand? No, I mean, you can boil this down to be a lot simpler. What do you stand for? What's your why? What are you passionate about? What do you want to help people learn, do, grow, achieve? Those are questions people can answer. Those, by the way, are tenets of their personal brand. But you can make it not feel like an overwhelming thing. right? To be able to help people identify what their true north is. And what that does is when they are able to articulate and, really just be authentic in who they are, that builds trust. That authenticity builds trust, and that trust confers onto your brand. So, when we think about, just the idea of a product recommendation, Rich, if you tell me that you love this product, I know you, I know what you're into, and that already lends that trust, right? Now, the flip, kind of the other side that gets people really wrapped around the axles, what you talked about before, which is the colors and the fonts and the logos and all of those things. And this might be incredibly controversial, but we'll see what people think. If your reps are cringy on social, that's a you problem. And the lockdown of you can only talk this way is usually a limiting philosophy on social. What's a better way to look at it is how can I enable you to want to have content that looks good. What we don't want is corporate creating mills of content that everyone just posts the same content out there. We all know that all that does is basically gets the content pushed down in the algorithm. And so that isn't what we need to do. Recently I helped a company build an AI experiment that was really more of a prompting tool. Yes, there's a library of product assets, but I want you to feel empowered to go live with a reel that talks about what you're experiencing that day and how that product might fit into that. And so if I can give you, find out what you're interested in talking about through AI, I know a little bit about you as a personal brand because I've asked, or primed the AI with some questions about them as a personal brand. And as the AI, I know what the corporate brand is and what the corporate tone is and all of those things. Then I can provide a suggested script of bullet points that you can use to feel more confident in delivering a message. That means there's 500 pieces of unique content as reels created by reps instead of everybody reposting the same thing and then pointing to, oh yeah, here I'm going to talk a little bit, here I'm going to insert this video from corporate, and then I'll talk again at the end, which is still, that's okay, right? We got to celebrate where we can get that. But if you can really start to have them creating the content, or as we call it, UGC, user generated content, right, that's going to be so much more valuable. So creating the frameworks, creating content libraries that are elemental, not just here's what you slap on social. Create the pieces that they can use to put something together that meshes with their personal brand. If you have the tool sets that can enable you, ensuring that content is tagged with the right sales motion, the right product, the right whatever it is for your company, the right customer goal or customer objective. Think about how you're organizing your content from your rep's perspective, not your brand architecture necessarily. They might be the same. If you've done an amazing job with your brand architecture, it would come through that viewpoint. But if you're using it primarily as this is our category, this is our product, this is where you find it, think about flipping that around to say, what's the customer problem we're solving? And what's the content that somebody can use as elements of proof that they can work into their own content strategy and their own personal brand?
I'm glad you at least came back around a little bit to help the company support them without losing all control and consistency, yes, right? Because yep, the majority of this audience is all corporate from direct, yep, selling. So let's talk about that, right? You just talked about how effective it is when, you and I have been friends forever. You tell me you like this product. It did wonderful things for you this way. A product I never even would have considered before you shared that, right? So what are companies you've seen doing to help the reps turn that social into actual sales, right? It's great if I know you love this product, but if I don't go to buy that, so anything that you've seen that really takes it from the sharing, right? To where all of a sudden I monetize that.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to, look at creating the same kind of funnel that we think about at corporate for our reps. So helping with the, automated content calendars, right? If we've got a campaign theme that we're working on, we can create content suggestions that can work for our reps. So suggesting what we should be talking about this week. Maybe it's always that we're Motivation Mondays, or we're doing something on Fridays that we're helping to set a rhythm for our field around a calendar of content. So that helps them continue to have content to think about and post. Integrating tools that allow the reps to directly post within social platforms using the guidelines, right? So make it easy for them. Maybe you're not going to give them the whole content in the video, but I bet you can create 5 killer templates and backgrounds that can help them look more professional as they do it. You can make sure that they have isolated product shots that they can incorporate or point to. We can do so many things with overlays, right? As we're going through things. And, like even what I'm talking about here, like on screen here, we can do this, reps can do this in their video content and, drive, more engagement through that. So if we had some of these little things like this, right, that they can use as elements, then that helps them look more professional as they go. What I talked about with the AI coaching is another really interesting element. So think about, even if you're not there yet, the messaging frameworks that you can provide that just make it simple to say, if you're talking about the brand, here are the 3 things you should remember, right? If you give them 5 pages of a brand guide, you're going to overwhelm them. So give them the few things that they need to know to feel confident in representing the brand and having it mesh with their own personal brand. And think about how social syncs to CRM for those next step trackable moments, right? So trackable links, shareable carts, so many great things happening in the industry, right? And that convergence that we're seeing between direct selling and maybe some of the tools that are in the affiliate and brand ambassador space for, maybe more traditional consumer brands. Look at what is going on in those traditional consumer brands and see how those tools might fit into your ecosystem if it makes sense. And again, I say ecosystem, wanting it to be purposeful and connected. But if I can connect those things together and have trackable links that both I as a rep and us as a company can see what's actually performing well and what's not, then that enables us to do more of the things that work and refine those things to get them to be even higher performing. I can go in right now, to a tool like ChatGPT or Claude and, ask it to work with me, think about AI as a partner to create a lead magnet flow. And, that can help a rep take somebody who, Rich, like, I don't know anything about this product. That allows me to potentially give you the next breadcrumbs. And, I don't have to be an expert if I can, if it were me being a rep and me being corporate, I would be thinking about feeding some of those big documents we all have into AI and empowering and freeing our reps to work from a really strong base.
That's great advice, because and you just referenced, looking at some of those tools outside of the space too, because let me tell you, when you're talking about social commerce, right, you are talking about inside of direct selling, outside of direct selling. That's our competition. And you know how our marketing group always gives me these stats to throw up there, right? That social commerce by 2030 is going to be like $8.5 trillion out. That's even hard to fathom, that number. So as you were talking, we talked about, you referenced AI, right? ChatGPT and Claude and things like that. And I will tell you just personally, it's so simple to use those, right? I cut and paste out of emails that somebody sent me. It creates a PowerPoint deck of 8 slides that, is exactly what they're looking for and what they're saying. So I just went to DSU last month, I guess that was. No.
Mm-hmm.
And the number one topic, right? I don't want to call it the shiny object in the room, because it isn't some newfangled thing that's going to go away. It is the talk of the town, though, right now. Let's talk a little bit about, first, let's talk about AI from a corporate perspective. And that, because you've nudged around the edges as a field rep out there. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure, that sounds good. Hey, we should start off any conversation with AI around leveraging the current trend in AI. I don't know if you've seen these, Rich, but this is the week of the AI action figure. So, I took the liberty.
You can take that one off the.
But this is mind-blowing, right? These are things that we couldn't even, think of a couple of years ago, where a well-engineered prompt gets me, just like you talked about, an image with text that's reasonably on point, and so it's so much has changed. And if I can talk, a little bit about AI, from a corporate perspective first, is I think we need to stop being afraid of it. It's empowering your team and helping them really focus on what matters, right? Using it as a brainstorming partner, using it to increase the speed of creating deliverables. Like you talked about, being able to get the outline of a slide deck done, a little bit faster. We're also busy. And some of the mundane things, let's rely on our AI partner, to help us do some of those things. And so, I would be using AI for conversion optimization. So think about your corporate campaigns, customer segmentation. Rallyware has some amazing capabilities yourself in your own platform, of how you can leverage the data and democratize the data to, think about how you do segmentation with your reps. How are you doing that, and how are you using that data to predict what will happen next? Using AI for personalization. I built at Microsoft, the first personalization engine that was the most manual thing you will ever see before. This was I'm dating myself, right? But we developed it in the Microsoft Business Solutions, because we had 300 modules of product that people didn't necessarily know which ones, were meant for them. Now, if you've got, 300 SKUs, that's a lot of information to know as a rep. So how can you simplify that down using AI to say, what are the best products? Let's say it's a beauty brand, right? What are the best products for somebody that has normal skin and has some anti-aging concerns, right? So I can quickly sift through what's important, and I can use that either in personalization of my website, or I can use it for rep coaching so that they can narrow in their focus with a client they know has those concerns, and eliminate some of the other noise away from it. Make them smart. Make your reps just, easy rock stars, and build their confidence with AI, I think is a real opportunity to super speed their time to confidence by providing them product knowledge, sales motion knowledge, to be able to rock it out more quickly.
You talked about saving a little time. For me, building a PowerPoint deck, it took like 45 seconds instead of, for me, it would have taken 4 to 8 hours, right?
Yeah.
To put that together in the old days. So going back, I would tell you, I have seen some wonderful success within our clients' corporate ecosystem where they have challenged their coworkers, call it a hackathon, call it a whatever, use AI to solve a known company problem, right? And let them identify what those problems are because they know what's broken within corporate, right? And you will get some unbelievable success from individuals or parts of the company that you never expected to get it from when you rolled that out. It's amazing what those tools can do to somebody who just thinks about things a little bit differently, right?
Yep. I mean, it's an icebreaker too. If you have people that see the problem, but they don't necessarily feel like they might know the solution, you can incorporate AI into those brainstorming sessions to, clearly, they can articulate the problem down to the level of detail, right? You can plug in some data to support it, and you'd be amazed what you get out of that as brainstorming fodder, because ultimately we want to combine our gut and our insights with the power of data. And, so those frontline individuals who know where the problems are can just take off in their ability to help be problem solvers and solution finders.
That's exactly right. So I'm monitoring our time right now. I'd like to get to some of those questions if we can with you. Otherwise, we'll get back to those people individually. But step back. What's the future hold for direct selling in this rapidly changing digital landscape that you've been sharing about for the last 45 minutes with us?
Yeah. So I think that, there's kind of two parts of this. What does the future hold and where do we start? Right. And so when, if I were to be a little tongue in cheek, as I wont to be, is you can't lead tomorrow with a roadmap from 2015. So, I'd really be encouraging people to dig in and think about, this holistic experience that they're building of a frictionless future. So if you can reduce the friction, you'll increase the momentum. If you can reduce the fragmentation, you'll increase the momentum. Again, kind of circling back to those are your two keys: simplification, reducing friction, reducing fragmentation are going to yield amazing results.
So did our Chief Sales Officer, Dan O'Mara, give you those two that you should be talking about today? You sound like him when we're talking to a prospect. He can't say the word frictionless enough times in his presentation.
Well, what's funny is, I'm not sure I'm going to say this the right way, but I said one time, that when we refactor systems, sometimes it feels like, somebody who's doing this, we think so much about the tech and we forget about the people. It's the exact wrong way.
Amen. Yeah.
And so oftentimes what I say about systems that are designed from that perspective is we go from poking our reps in the eye with a stick to poking them in the other eye with a stick. Yes, we've changed the pain you're experiencing, but this eye is going to get a break. And now so we really have to live in their shoes and think about that. I think we also have to think about how we're going to address this idea of hybrid models. We've got direct sales purists, we've got affiliate marketing, we've got companies that are abandoning direct sales. I don't have a, magic 8 ball. But what I said to someone last night is I predict in 5 years, some wonderkind is going to come along and make direct selling sexy again. Who's going to be that wonderkind? Because it's all there. It's all the same things. Affiliate marketing, like I am an affiliate marketer for some companies. It is, and not ones that have been traditional direct sellers that have transitioned. I've just been experiencing what their ecosystems feel like, so I understand it, right? And they're doing all the same things. They're setting up campaigns. They're teaching me how to have more successful sales motions. All of these things are very much in common. And so how do we, ultimately meet where the consumer, wants to have the interaction? It might not be the party in their home. That might not be what is exciting them today. But I don't know, in a couple of years, all of these, young Gen Alphas who, are going back to digital point and shoot cameras, and, you don't know what's going to happen. So I just think what you need to be is nimble and flexible to embrace the opportunity where it happens. And how do you be nimble and flexible? You have the data that shows you where the trends are going, and you experiment.
So thank you so much. You've given us great advice. I've got a couple questions I'd like to. So we know now some of the levers and dials we should start moving and switching, right? So I've got one question here. It says, we're under pressure to hit recruiting, sales goals, struggling with retention, being told to digitally transform without clear guidance. Here's the question. Where do we start?
Yep. And that is part 2, right? Is if I were to start with anything, I start with rep enablement, because that's how people experience the brand, is through your reps. So, really look at, and we've talked about it all throughout this session, giving your reps the field, the tools that they need to grow, and doing so thoughtfully, with it being part of your overall vision, understanding that you're going to implement things in pilots, and you're going to implement parts of the overall vision. But if you can educate them on what the future, your top reps that are really invested on what that future is going to look like, you're going to get them as advocates to help onboard the new reps. I would say that, if it's tedious to do, but with data, it changes everything, is map those journeys, map your rep journeys, map your customer journeys, really understand them, and understand what the underlying thoughts, beliefs, and actions are that are driving success or preventing success. So that's the data below the data we talked about with those interviews after you have the data segmentation. Consolidate tools for efficiency. Make sure the business is leading your digital transformation. You don't, all of us, whether we're IT geeks or whatever, we need to have that business and user perspective first and foremost, and not shiny technology. So, keep that in mind as you're starting. And then I'm just all about pilots and MVPs, and even doing those in a less automated way to first prove out the success of those, and then automating it, and creating something that continues to work can be really important.
So I want to get one more question in here and I apologize to the other ones that are out there. You talked about empowering the reps with those tools, with the content, right?
Mm-hmm.
One question says, our reps are digitally active, but not productive. How do we close that gap or address that problem, right?
Mm-hmm. So this is, lessons learned myself, is one of the best things that I think you can do is reduce the amount of content that you give your reps. get them out of, scrolling and into acting as quickly as possible. So if they think the business of being a direct sales rep is, you want to have the training. I'm not saying you don't have the training. I'm just saying really make it just in time and bite-sized enough that the job doesn't become consuming training. Because
so I'm gonna stop you right there, because you just, without knowing it, gave a great commercial for Rallieware, right? It's that just in time, what I should do to be the most effective in my business. And I think that's a great summary for this whole digital transformation conversation. And our friend Mike Edwards said you are not a IT geek, by the way. So
thanks, Mike.
that's the beauty of these conversations, right? Thank you so much. I want to a couple other informational pieces. So Rallieware puts out a weekly blog. Today's blog was actually digital transformation and direct selling, a 2025 checklist. We've also put together a toolkit. If you want that, just email me at rich@rallieware.com. And Julie, if they want to follow up with you, what do we do?
Yeah, so there will be an item in that toolkit that's coming from me. I've pulled together a huge digital transformation guide that's full of stats, ideas, things that you can toss around and use. And there is a template that you can use to jumpstart your digital transformation. So definitely look in that toolkit from Rallieware, because that'll be a goodie in there for you. And then if you want to connect with me, feel free to reach out to me at julie@ritdigital.com, and you can see my website right here. You can grab a block of time with me if you like.
That's great. So Julie, thank you again so much for your time, for your insights. That's the beauty of you having worked not only within so many direct selling companies. I wish you'd be able to hold a job, but the consulting on the outside to help people transform too. So that really helps. I appreciate your time. Everybody out there, have a great day, and we'll be in touch with the recording. We'll be in touch. You should be in touch with me if you want the digital toolkit, because that's got Julie's great information in there, and you don't have to look at talking heads to benefit from that. So, all right, everybody, have a great day until we meet next time in the ongoing Rallieware webinar series. Thanks so much.
Great. Bye.
Bye-bye.